two called by prosecutors. Our Jim Armstrong is live tonight outside the federal courthouse. Jim, what happens now?
Well, Lisa, we're certainly at the point of the case where we could expect closing arguments to begin, but the judge sort of surprised everyone late this afternoon by announcing he's postponing the closings until Monday morning. Jury's going to come back here at 9 o'clock, and that's when they'll hear both sides give their final word on this phase of the trial. After only 2 half days of testimony by 4 witnesses, Johar Tsarnaev's defense team rested its case, which focused largely on trying to prove Tamerlan Tsarnaev was the mastermind behind the Boston Marathon bombings. A computer expert testified first today about all of that damning material found on both of the brothers' computers: Al-Qaeda publications, bomb-making instructions, jihadi speeches. All of it, jurors heard, originated from Tamerlan's laptop and was later shared on Johar's. That witness next showed the jury some of Tamerlan's internet searches prior to the marathon bombings, looking for words like transmitter, oscillator, fireworks firing system, Boston Marathon, and Ruger P95, the gun the brothers used. But under cross-examination, that expert admitted all of that content might be on Tamerlan's computer, but anybody, including Johar, could have put it all there. The defense also called an FBI fingerprints expert who testified that Tamerlan's prints were found on several pieces of evidence on Boylston Street itself. Like this cardboard from inside one of the pressure cookers. None of Johar's prints were found at the finish line. But she, too, under cross-examination, admitted that does not mean Johar didn't touch some of the items. His prints, she said, may have simply been wiped away or destroyed by the explosions themselves. And she also testified Johar's prints are, in fact, on the makeshift Rubbermaid bomb left behind on Laurel Street in Watertown. Before he sent the jury home this afternoon, Judge George O'Toole warned them that over the next several days, certainly this weekend, a lot of them are going to be getting together with friends and family for the Easter or Passover holidays. He said your friends and family are going to ask you a lot of questions about this trial. Do not answer them. He was very direct, asking the jury, do you understand me? And then you heard, Lisa, a chorus of yes, yes, sirs. So it's clear to the jury what they can and can't do over the next couple days.
Yeah, Jim, what is this we're hearing about a T-shirt that one of the jurors was wearing?
Right, so there is one juror in particular who I guess you could say tends to dress what in a way some would consider inappropriate. Today she had a shirt on that said no fear. One day last week she had a shirt on that said not listening in big bold letters. She tends to maybe dress more casually than other jurors. She tends also to only wear clothes that have Led Zeppelin logos, Led Zeppelin concert tees, a Led Zeppelin hoodie as well that says get the lead out. So while she's certainly not violating any rules, I checked with the U.S. Attorney's Office, there is not like a juror dress code that she's not adhering to. If she were doing that, then certainly the judge would intervene if she was wearing something that was, threatening someone else, for example. But as it stands now, she just has a bit of a reputation for wearing clothes that maybe some would say feel a little bit inappropriate for the case.
Curious choices. All right, Jim Armstrong live at the courthouse. Thank you, Jim. And you can.
Well, Hollywood is ready to tell the story of the Boston Marathon bombing.
It'll be told from the perspective of former police commissioner Ed Davis. Our Jim Armstrong takes a closer look at who's behind it.
If your first thought is, wait a minute, this is a tragedy that shouldn't even be made into a movie, you're not alone.
I was very hesitant to get involved in it at first.
Few people were as close to the bombings as the city's police commissioner, Ed Davis. In the 2 years since, he says, he's been approached about movies and books, but has always said no, until now. Was your initial hesitation, did it have anything to do with victims and survivors and how they might take this?
It did. It did. Obviously, I've been very focused on the victims of this case from the time it started.
But Davis says he was really impressed with the way CBS News and 60 Minutes handled its coverage. So when CBS Films called with a proposal, he considered it.
Last year, they approached me and asked me if they could buy my life rights. And quite frankly, I didn't even know what that meant.
What it means is that as soon as this fall, filming starts on a movie called Patriots Day. Davis will be the central character in a plot that starts with the bombings and ends at the boat.
It's an important part of the history of the city, and it should be documented. And I'm satisfied that this group is responsible and clearly interested in telling the story the way it happened.
And making you the centerpiece of it.
Yeah, that's very uncomfortable for me.
Dorchester's own Mark Wahlberg will produce the film and could end up playing Ed Davis himself.
I know that there's a rumor that that Mark's going to do that, and you know, that's Hollywood. I don't get involved in those issues. That whole Hollywood stuff is way beyond me. I don't know what they do or how they do it.
Davis will make money from the deal, but he says he's got victims and survivors in mind. He told me he's already making arrangements to make a sizable donation to one family in particular, to whom he says he's gotten especially close, but he didn't want to name them because they're still considering his offer. Jim Armstrong, WBZ News.
And the movie is
leading and who was following. Jim Armstrong was in the courtroom during those closing arguments. Jim?
Paula, at times those closing arguments almost seemed like they were interchangeable. On one hand, you had the government saying that Johar Tsarnaev brought terrorism to people's main streets and backyards, but his own defense team said he is ready with this verdict to take full responsibility for his actions. Prosecutors wasted no time, starting their closing statements by telling jurors Johar Tsarnaev targeted Patriots Day 2013
And they are off.
because he wanted the world to watch him call his fellow holy warriors to battle. Quote, he chose a day when there would be civilians on the sidewalks because he wanted to make a point. He wanted to punish America. Assistant U.S. Attorney Alok Chakravarti told the jury, adding the defendant and his brother acted together, partners in crime, he said. And when the plans went south, Chakravarti said Johar scrawled his infamous boat note. He chose to justify what he did. Even after writing those words, he said, he was still angry. He was negotiating the terms of death with America. Prosecutors say Johar chose his backpack's location carefully at the finish line as they showed jurors this photo. Quote, there is nothing about this day that was a twist of fate. This was a cold, calculated terrorist attack. It was bloodthirsty. The defense's closing echoed its opening from a month ago. Attorney Judy Clark saying, quote, there is no excuse. No one is trying to make one. Planting bombs at the Boston Marathon was a senseless act. But Clark was clear over and over again the bombings and the disasters that came after only happened because Tamerlan Tsarnaev, she said, led the way. Johar's actions inexcusable, she said, adding, let's be honest about what the evidence actually shows. We are not asking you to excuse the conduct. Clark said Tamerlan's fingerprints alone are on the bombs and materials for a reason. Quote, we need to understand who was leading and who was following. After the defense's closing statements, the government actually gets a second opportunity, a rebuttal closing statement, so they get the final word. Assistant U.S. Attorney Bill Weinreb got up and directly addressed the claim that Tamerlan Tsarnaev took the lead. He said it's all well and good for the defendant to assert that he's guilty, but his dead brother is guiltier. But he said to the jury, that's absolutely not a defense, and he implored them not to consider it as one when they get to work here first thing tomorrow morning. Outside federal court, Jim Armstrong, WBZ News. Paula.
Jim, thanks.
The most vivid moment of this trial, if there was one.
There's so many to choose from, Lisa. Images from pretty much every single day of this trial that will stick in my mind and certainly in the jurors' minds for the rest of our lives. They saw, we saw, and heard things that you simply can't stop thinking about. For me, on a very personal level, it was entirely the testimony of Bill Richard, of Martin Richard's dad. We knew that he was going to be called, and when he took the stand, you actually heard some people in the courtroom sigh, just take deep inhales and think, all right, this is about to happen. The burden is on him. It's an incredible burden for what he's about to do, but what we're about to hear is going to be really impactful, and it certainly was, in big part because of the way that Bill Richard spoke about his family and about his son and about his daughter and about his wife and about being at the marathon. Spoke of it in such an open and honest and genuine way. At one point, describing the events, he said, you know what, I guess we were just unlucky that day. That gives you a little window into how he is processing this unfathomable tragedy. And actually, in the middle of closing statements, just yesterday, I believe it was, or the day before, the prosecution seized on that and really reminded jurors that nothing about the marathon bombing, this was Alok Chakravarti giving the closing statement, saying nothing about the bombing was unlucky or accidental. He said it was a cold, calculating, bloodthirsty plan pulled off by Johar Tsarnaev and his older brother Tamerlan. But you didn't get a sense at all from Bill Richard of anger. You got a sense of resolve, a sense of this is our life as we have to move forward. I was just so struck by that. And because it's very personal, too, I have an 8-year-old boy who doesn't look dissimilar to Martin Richards. For me, I couldn't look at Martin Richard and not see my son. And I couldn't hear Bill Richard talk and not begin to think about what on earth I would say. I couldn't do it. I absolutely couldn't do it. So his testimony stuck with me for days and days, to the point where I really couldn't even talk to my wife about it very much because I would cry. Coming back here to court, I sort of got a little bit, I felt some relief, I guess, at talking to other reporters. Almost all of us had experienced the exact same thing. Mr. Richards' testimony stuck in all of our minds for days and days. And part of the only reason that it was pushed out, I guess, of the 4 of our minds is because of all the other horrible and troubling and difficult testimony and images that we heard and saw that followed Mr. Richard. But if you ask me, a couple of years from now, or years forever from now, really, what would stick with me, it's going to be seeing Bill Richard on the stand talking about his little boy.
Jim, thank you for painting such a vivid picture for the past couple of months of everything that's been happening in the courtroom. Obviously, no cameras, but you've done a tremendous job of bringing this important story to the community, so we thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jim.
And it's amazing the courage that he's talking about. They're going to have to do this again because there's a good chance prosecutors will be calling a lot of those same people like Bill Richards back to the stand for this punishment phase.
And some new people as well to sort of add to that. So you're right, another difficult stretch ahead.
We are getting more reaction from the survivors tonight. Mark Fuckerell came to the courthouse several days during the trial. Today he wrote on Facebook, "Our hearts are with the victims' families, fellow survivors, supporters all over the world, and with our beloved Boston. Thank you for your love and support always." Hard to forget David Ortiz's memorable reaction to the bombings back on April 20th, 2013. A few days after that at Fenway Park. And this is our expletive city. Big Papi and the rest of the team banded together that season. Of course, they went on to win the World Series. They often mention for someone else. Jim Armstrong is live at the finish line tonight. Jim?
Well, David, the finish line preparations are already well underway, not just for the marathon itself next Monday, but in part for the commemorative ceremonies that'll happen here starting tomorrow. A little further down Boylston Street at Forum Restaurant, and then right here at the finish line in front of Marathon Sports, both the governor and the mayor will unveil banners to commemorate the 2-year anniversary of the bombings. The 1-year anniversary of the Boston Marathon bombings last April came with much ceremony. This year, the day will pass with less formality, but with no less emotion. Mayor Marty Walsh asking everyone to perform one act of kindness as part of what his office is calling One Boston Day.
But we're asking people to go out and try and help people and do something in the spirit of collaboration, spirit of giving.
One Boston Day is the reason there's this pile of shoes in the lobby of the Downtown Crossing Hyatt. The hotel is collecting them to donate 500 pairs, one for each of their rooms, to the St. Francis House homeless shelter.
It shows the strength of Boston, and we've had an outpouring from everybody. Our associates have been just so generous, as have been the guests and all the local businesses.
Tomorrow, Governor Charlie Baker will join State House staffers in a moment of silence, something he encourages everyone to do as he reflects on the bombings and on the bombers' trial that's occupying so many thoughts right now.
I just think it's a weird act of timing that ends up concluding at about the same time that we come up on this anniversary. I was amazed at the ability of those people every single day to go into that courtroom and relive through the most graphic testimony and visual images you could possibly imagine everything that they went through.
The sentencing phase of the marathon bombing trial won't happen until a week from today, but Judge George O'Toole called all the jurors to federal court this morning to tell them something that he said he had to say in person, and that was essentially, do not come to the Boston Marathon. Do not watch any coverage of the marathon, and don't watch any coverage of tomorrow's commemoration of the attacks either. He said at this point he doesn't want them to even think about what they might see on television or read in the paper. He wants their knowledge of the event to be confined strictly to what happens in courtroom 9 over at federal court. Live at the finish line, Jim Armstrong, WBZ News. David.
All right, Jim, thank you. And WBZ will have live coverage.